Hello everyone, good evening. I'm trying to insert the energy into the room. So my name's Shannon and I am the Events and Marketing Manager for 2020 Productions. We're a not-for-profit organisation and we work with young people on creative learning, wellbeing and social action. So under our social action umbrella comes the Fenland and East Cambridgeshire Youth Advisory Boards, which are groups of young people that meet to discuss issues that young people feel passionate about. So they do this through consultations with young people. They focus group young people and they connect to their peers to really understand what you guys care about, because youth voice is important. This is a bit of a plug for YAB as well, because I know that not all of you young people in the room right now are YAB members, and you should be. So this weekend we're actually recruiting Saturday and Sunday, so I'm going to offer you free cake, coffee, milkshakes, whatever you like. So come along, have a chat with us and get to know what the Youth Advisory Board is more. So particularly if something tonight resonates with you and you decide that you would like to be a young person who is actively pursuing to showcase your voice within the community, then come and chat to us in the break and come and see us on the weekend. All of the details of the weekends are just outside on the YAB stands. So I do have an apology to issue because Simon Wilkes is unfortunately unable to make it today. So he sends his apologies. And just a little bit of housekeeping for you. So we have fire exits here and here. And the fire meeting point will be following me waving my clipboard around towards the left of the leisure centre. The toilets are just down the corridor on the right, just outside of here. And there are snacks and drinks just outside, but please do not bring any of those in here because Cromwell are very strict about their seating, and we do not want to. We want to respect their space. Also, please try to social distance in the room as much as possible. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation of the evening, hosted by one of our fabulous Youth Advisory Board members and chair, an extremely extraordinary young man is Jack Whelan. Over to you, Jack.
Can you all hear me? We all good. Can you hear me? Yeah? Great. Okay, brilliant. Thank you everyone for being here. It's great to see you all here. I can't see you very well, but you know, you're all here and really happy to have you all here today. And just welcome to our panel. We have Lorna Dupra, we have Dr. Nick Johnson, we have Ruth Hoffton, we have Lucy Fraser, and we have Darryl Preston. And it's thank you all for coming in today. It's really good to see you here. So a bit about me. So I do A-levels at Cromwell, so I do A-levels here. I do law, business and psychology. And I'm also chair of the Fenland Youth Advisory Board for Democracy. So that means that I do a lot of work with politicians and with young people to help them engage, and also educating young people about our democratic system. So let's get on to the first question for our panel. We'd like to invite you now to introduce yourself to the audience. So 1 minute, just give yourself an introduction and how you affect young people. Lorna, do you want to start?
Okay, I'm Lorna Dupre and I am one of the two district councillors for Sutton, just down the road from Chatteris. I'm also a county councillor on Cambridgeshire County Council, where I chair the Environment and Green Investment Committee, and I'm also chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee of the Combined Authority, which means that it's my role to hold this chap to my left to his promises and his commitments and ask him all sorts of questions about what he's doing and what he's not doing and why he's not doing it.
All right, brilliant. Nick, do you want to go next?
I'm Nick and I'm scared of law. So I'm as surprised in some ways as many people that I'm Dr. Nick, but that's my previous title. I've now actually got another prefix before my professional title, the Children's Doctor at Hinchinbrook. I'm Mayor Dr. Nick Johnson of the Combined Authority of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and I came to be elected to that role, replacing the previous incumbent James Palmer. The post was created in 2017, and as the mayor, I do have a sort of an overview of this. This is the area, where you live, but also across the whole of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And I'm involved in looking at things as varied as transport, the idea of developing skills and apprenticeships for people of all ages, and also the challenge around affordable housing. So almost 30 odd years, and I continue to be a doctor 1 day a week at Hinchinbrook Hospital. I may even have, in the course of time, looked after some of you when you were younger, because I used to be the baby doctor on the special care unit. But now most of my time is spent being a politician, but I still quite enjoy being called Dr. Nick. So thank that.
All right, brilliant. Ruth.
Hello, my name is Ruth Hoffton. I'm Chair of Donington Parish Council. I'm retired now and have been for over 10 years, but I spent most of my life in advertising on local and national newspapers, on business-to-business magazines, and I ended up, as Nick and I were saying earlier, working for Auto Trader, which I'm quite sure you've all heard of. I enjoyed my job hugely and very much regretted having to retire. I worked till I was 65, so I did 5 more years than was necessary, so you know how much I enjoyed it. Once I'd retired, I then decided I would like to do something for the village. So then I joined the parish council, and 11 years ago, and I have been chair on it now for 8 years. Really enjoy it. Love doing things to help the village and just make it look good and be as healthy and happy as we can possibly make it.
Yeah, and Lucy.
Hi, I'm Lucy Fraser, so I am the MP for South East Cambridgeshire, and that area includes almost all of East Cambridgeshire, including places like Ely. I'm also a member of the government, so I am Financial Secretary to the Treasury. What that means is I am responsible for tax policy. And I always say that being an MP has 3 roles. You have the responsibility to help on individual problems. So you have surgeries where people who have really exhausted every single avenue, they just don't know who to turn to. They often turn to their MP and you help them solve their individual problems. You have a regional role to help improve the area. And one of the things that I've really focused on, that I care passionately about, and one of the reasons I entered into politics, was trying to help young people and ensure that they have the opportunities that they deserve, you know, wherever they were born, you know, geographically, and whoever their parents were, everyone should have the same opportunities. So I've done quite a lot to support school funding and lobbied really hard the government, together with my neighbouring MP Steve Barclay, who is the MP here, to get East Cambridgeshire and Fenland to be one of the opportunity areas, which is funding this scheme. So really amazingly delighted to see how that is operating in practice and how you're benefiting from that. And then the third job of an MP is to obviously pass laws and work on a national level. So those are just a few bits of what I do.
Okay, great. And Darryl.
Thanks, Jack. Good evening to you. My name's Darryl Preston. I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. I was elected to that position in May of this year. Just a little bit about a Police and Crime Commissioner and what they aren't, and that is the police. I'm not the Chief Constable. I don't direct police officers, you know, to police chatterists, for example. But what I do is that I control the budget, I set the plan, and I set the priorities for policing. So that's what the Chief Constable has to follow. So priorities around local community concerns. However, my background is that I actually was in the police for 30 years. Started off in the Metropolitan Police in London. Lots of experience in frontline and the riot squads and armed policing. And then moved to Cambridgeshire and became a detective, ending up running the public protection team. So quite a lot of experience in policing. And the reason I went for this role, I mean, I found it fascinating. Police and Crime Commissioners are fairly new. Been around since about 2012. And the main reason for their introduction, and the bit that really appeals to me, the job is about listening to our local communities and acting on their concerns, ensuring that the police are delivering a service for all of our communities and keeping us all safe. So that's the bit that really motivates me and gets me up in the morning.
All right, brilliant. Thank you for that. And so, you know, for the first real question, Youth Advisory Board have been having a massive push recently on food poverty. Is there anything that you've been doing at your local political levels to help support people with food and fuel who may be struggling this winter? So we're going to start really local. So Ruth, would you like to start this one off?
Okay. It's difficult for parish councils because we are, if you like, if you think of politics as a ladder, we're definitely on the bottom rung, but I like to think that that bottom rung is firmly put into the ground. So what we try to do is we're members of LEAP, if that means anything to anybody. They're a body who look after fuel poverty and help people with their fuel bills. We do have in the village a thrift shop, which helps a huge amount. It also points us in the direction of where there could be some poverty or some need. We are, excuse me, I have to have a note. I get like this. It's old age, I think, something like that. We're looking at, oh that's right, it's about 12 months or so ago, before the COVID, everything's before COVID, isn't it? We were in a discussion with Age UK about putting a community warden into the village. Unfortunately that went by the board, but we are actually picking that up as we speak now, so hopefully that will help. We've just recently been introduced to something called Think Communities, which is from Cambridgeshire County Council, and we are seeing one of the managers from that at our next parish council meeting, which is on next Wednesday. So hopefully that will give us some steer as well. So if you like, we're at a slightly unknown level at the moment, but we are hopefully going to be getting better at that. I know some villages have food banks, etc., but we haven't actually got into that yet.
Okay, and Lorna, just to carry on with you, the government has been spending quite a lot on food and fuel grants. To their credit, they've actually put a lot of effort into that. And what have you been doing to make sure, at a parish and county level, to make sure the vulnerable families get the support that they need from that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we were all incredibly impressed by the massive campaign that Marcus Rashford, the footballer, put on to just raise the issue of children who didn't have enough to eat, families that didn't have enough to eat. And we all took that very much to heart, I'm sure. And he really showed up something that was incredibly unfair across society. On the county council, we've had a change of control, so we had a new group come in to take leadership of the county council, and I'm part of that leadership group there that's running the county council. We made a decision and we made a commitment that we would, whatever the government paid us, even if it wasn't enough, we would ensure that every child and young person that's eligible for free school meals would have free school meals throughout the holidays through supermarket vouchers, as well as in term time. And we have honoured that commitment. We did that over the summer. We did that through the half terms, the Christmas holidays, and we have absolutely put that as one of our foremost commitments to people and families in Cambridgeshire, that we're going to support that and make sure that our families have the food that they need. There's also some money in addition to the money that we're using for the government funding, and we top it up where necessary. There is also an amount within that for other ways of help, and we've been being very careful to make sure that that's going out as well. So we're offering support with fuel and with other unexpected cost of living needs, and we're doing a huge push on that as well. So plenty going on.
Okay, and Lucy, obviously Lorna said how she's using that government funding. Are there any plans to extend that funding to Christmas, to February half term and to Easter in terms of free school meals?
Yes, so that money has been extended for the school holidays that Lorna was talking about. As well as it's not just about money, it's also about having time at school in the holidays for people who would benefit from that. But what you've referred to, Jack, and what Lorna has talked about is the Chancellor announced about 6 weeks ago an extra £500 million for the most vulnerable families across the country, that money being distributed by the local authorities who know their communities the most, and that isn't dictated by government as to how it should be spent. It's up for the local authority, as Laura identified, to work out who needs it and how they should spend it. But in addition to that money, we also have put forward funds, and these have been going on a long time, but were extended at the recent budget. So we have what's called a warm homes discount. So people who are living in poverty are able to access some funds in order to pay for their bills. We also have a large number of people, there's around 2 million people who can access support for their council tax bills, eventually universal support for the children on free school meals. There's also an energy price cap, so we're all benefiting from energy prices being at a certain level, enabling people who are the lowest, who are either the lowest paid or not paid, can get through the winter and support themselves.
Okay, brilliant. And Darryl, this next question is just for you. From a Youth Advisory Board consultation, around 40% of young people said that they wouldn't feel confident to go to the police to report a crime. And when asked why, they said about having bad experiences with the police in the past. They distrust the police system, especially after the murder of Sarah Everard. They're worried about they won't be believed, or they're actually worried about being harassed or targeted by the person that they're reporting to the police. In light of this new information, do you have any plans to help police to build better relationships with young people and to try and bring those numbers down?
Well, the simple answer, Jack, is yes. I do want to be really clear in the first place. Looking at those figures there, 40% of people wouldn't feel happy going to the police. That's a real concern. And I would really encourage anybody, young people in all of our communities, if you are a victim of crime, you must go to the police and report it if you possibly can. So important. Now, and you will be taken seriously, and the police will do everything they can do to protect you, because I know one of the reasons that young people often feel that they can't go to the police is fear of consequences for those who might be committing these crimes. I was in the police for 30 years, and I dealt with many, many crimes where young people, indeed, I was head of child protection. And what I found was that more often than not, those concerns were never really played through. In that, the system is such that if you go to the police, there are measures in place, where support and protection can be put in. Now, when it comes to trust, what I would say is that I think in this country, we're in a reasonably fortunate position, and it goes back to the principles of policing, that the police are the public, and the public are the police. But, we can't rest on our laurels here, and clearly needs to be done if 40% of young people do feel that they can't go to the police. So what I've actually put in place is a number of programs. We have a schools program that's ongoing at the moment, and I'm just about to open a youth fund, which can be bidding through local councils and parish councils to look at local projects, to keep young people engaged, and that will include the police alongside some of the other activities that police are doing at the moment. Coming on to the third issue, which I think is one of confidence, particularly in recent nights as well. I am shocked, as I'm sure we all are, of the case of Sarah Everard, and my thoughts only go out to her family and friends. But what we were dealing there was an evil monster, and that happened to be a police officer. And I can assure you that all the police officers that I know are as shocked and horrified as the rest of us. But once again, I will be ensuring that this Chief Constable has everything in place to ensure that if there are any problems with our police officers, that they are dealt with swiftly and that they're not part of our police force going forward. And that's a piece of work that's ongoing at the moment.
Okay, and moving on, good transport links are essential for social mobility, especially for young people who want to get to school or an apprenticeship or they want to go to work. Nick, obviously we're aware of your new transport plan. Is there anything included in there that you might think would help benefit young people?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you for being interested in the transport plan, because it has only just officially launched. We're doing and I would encourage anybody, whilst you're on your phones and listening, you can actually now look at what's been launched in terms of the combined authorities new refresh. To throw a little bit of contention into the kind of the evening. I think everybody knows that there was a talk about, the previous mayor talked about building an underground underneath Cambridge City, and the background of that was possibly with funding of creating lots of garden villages, and it was something that was going to be seen as world changing. And actually, I will acknowledge that from an engineering feat, if we put a subterranean railway under Cambridge, it would have been something it would have been an engineering feat, but for me it made no sense. For me, it needed a kind of much more immediate answer, particularly for people like most of the people in here, something that was affordable, regular, and was actually going to be more deliverable in a shorter time period. So I made no secret of the fact that I thought that let's go back to what has actually been very successful in the course of time. Buses. Now, buses may not seem immediately sexy, but actually we've already got, within the last few months, we've introduced a kind of Uber-style bus on-demand service for West Huntingdonshire, which is proving incredibly popular, where literally with an app, you can go on an app, it's called the Ting thing. Unfortunately, it doesn't cover here now, but that's already kind of opening up opportunities in terms of where you can just ring up and for £1 get a zing across the area. So, there's many things I could talk about with transport, particularly I've put a lot of focus on buses. But the big thing is to talk about active travel lifestyles, because if you want to look at it at a bigger, grander scale of it, and the big elephant in the room, and there's a lot more people who are arguably a lot more important than me or anybody in this room today. In Glasgow now, the COP26 is looking at how we move around, and the choices that we make around transport is affecting the environment. And we have to move away from an over-reliance on carbon-based transport, and particularly the private kind of use of cars. So we need to move into much more affordable public transport, but you've got to provide it so that people can make those choices. It's got to be also done in a kind of fair way, because actually electric cars, much as though it's great to have, they're very expensive. So there's lots of thoughts going around in the Combined Authority. We've got lots of ideas, particularly about investment around public transport. But at the moment, it's very much around the buses scenario.
Okay. And Lucy, is there anything that you've been considering to do with transport in East Cambs?
Yes, lots. So I think transport is absolutely fundamental, because if you can't get to school, if you can't get to work, then we're not going to be serving our community very well. So I've worked on a number of projects since I've been the MP. So the first one was working with the previous mayor, who was also the leader of East Cambs District Council before that, to get the Ely bypass built. So I don't know whether any of you have used the Ely bypass, but really, really beneficial for people living in and around Ely. The second thing that's going to be delivered soon, which will help the people of Soham, is we're getting a train station, and that will be open by the end of December. One of the things that was announced in the buses, just to build on what Nick said about buses, because it is important in a rural community that you get around, and we can't have a train station everywhere, and we do need to get people out of cars. So on buses, the Chancellor announced funding for 30 electric buses in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, so that's great news, because meeting the target of getting people around and being carbon neutral. So there's obviously more to do, because we do need more buses, and I am supporting the District Council's plan for buses, which has a number of villages being connected through Cambridgeshire, through Ely, and I am putting that to the Mayor, because I would like him to support our plan for East Cambridgeshire.
Acknowledge the hard work that's already gone on in East Cambs, obviously delighted, particularly about Soham, it's going to be delivered. But you are right, thanks for mentioning the Zebra buses bid was a zero emission, I should say, because it was a real boon, and I think it's kind of very grateful that the government decided to give us some of that money to kind of show the initiative that buses are definitely something that we can be.
I'd like to come in on that if I can.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of talk tonight about East Cambridgeshire, which is great, it's lovely, but we're in Fenland, and what we need in Fenland is more buses. Oh, well, any would do, one or two a day would do.
I agree, and this is very much, and I'm really pleased to say that, because the demand responsive transport, the West Huntingdonshire pilot, we're doing it for 6 months, and I'm on Facebook all the time and trying to get people to make sure they use it.
Yeah.
It's proven popular, and it's a model that has been used around the country, and if it's working there, absolutely want to spread it out here. And let's not forget there are other things at Fenland. We need to deal with the issue of connectivity between March and Wisbech. And I think there's some really innovative stuff coming along, rail links that are hopefully in the course of time, very light rail links, but I hope looking at, there's a possibility there.
Yeah, no, I know. I do have to say though that we do tend to be the poor relations of anything that goes on in Cambridgeshire. You know, I go to meetings and listen to people who are saying this is happening and that's happening, etc. Go back to Vendor District Council and say, when's it going to happen here? And they look at me as if I'm just, you know, coming off the wrong bus, as it were. So,
Haven't got any buses.
well, no, 2 a day. We actually manage 2 a day. If you want to go shopping in Peterborough, you have to catch one at about 7:30 in the morning, and you can't get home till 8 o'clock at night.
Can I just say this is a really interesting example about how government works at every level, and transport is one of those areas where it's really important that, you know, we've got a cross-party group here at different levels, and it's an example of where it's really important that everybody, whatever party you're in, works together to get the things that you need for your area. So the way it works, well, the way I work it is, you know, working with the district council to understand what, who are working with the parish councils to understand what they need for their areas, and then me working with Nick to lobby government to get the funding for those put in place. So, you know, transport is something where it's really important that every level of government works together.
I think there's a number of things that that we need to think about, particularly with regard to young people. And the first thing is that there's a lot of energy that goes into looking at how we can make buses more frequent and regular in the day where they exist. But I think evenings and weekends are a huge problem, because everything seems to stop, even the places like Sutton and Chatteris that do have buses. They tend to stop at about 7 o'clock at night, which means that you can't go anywhere. And it's absolutely crazy that we live within miles of one of the great cathedrals of the Western world, and you can't get there by public transport on a Sunday. So I think we've really got to look at providing transport not just to get people to work and back in the working day, but also for all the leisure and other amenities that we need and we want to enjoy in the evenings and weekends. And we've also, I think, got to provide safe, active travel for people. I mean, I think that most of the roads around here, I certainly I can't ride a bike anyway, you know, hands up, I admit that. But I can't imagine safely riding a bike along many of the roads here, and we've got, if we're going to encourage people to use active travel, which is the most environmentally friendly form of transport, then we've got to make sure that that's actually available in a safe way with segregated cycle routes at cycleways, so that people can travel safely on foot and by bike. And ultimately, of course, one day it'll be fantastic. We'll have these self-driving electric pods that you can just call up on demand, and all our problems will be solved. But until we get there, and that may not be as far away as some of us imagine, we've got to sort out what we've got, and that means lots of safe, active travel and more buses in the evenings and the weekends and regular in the daytime.
Jack, may I come in on a point that Lorna raised there, which is just so important, and that is around road safety. And this is a real plea, because when I was shocked by this, the latest figures year before last, it's a shocking figure. 40 people died on the roads of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. 40 people, many of them young people, many of them your age. And another 300 or so seriously injured. You know, when we look at priorities, and I look at my priority, you know, in safety and policing, you know, that's really number one because of those figures I just gave. And the number one killer on our roads is speeding. By far, it's speeding. So, you know, a plea to everybody, not just you, for everybody on the panel everywhere, you know, watch our speed, drive safely.
We're leading other countries through that path, and obviously you're doing that as part of COP26, which is taking place as we speak. And we will reach our net zero target, not just with our £30 billion, but what government is doing, because government can't do it all. It's down to also companies, it's down to individuals. So we're using the 30 billion to harness private enterprise to do things too. And what we estimate is if government spends 30 billion incentivising companies to do things, private companies will spend £90 billion making sure that we decarbonise as a whole. And an example of that would be, for example, all the work that's going on to change cars from petrol cars to electric cars. There's a significant amount of private money going into that.
Okay, and moving on, we're going to move to antisocial behaviour now. So, Darryl, this is going to be your speciality. Not that you're doing it, Well, I won't ask what we did in your years. Okay? So could you share what the impact is of antisocial behaviour on crime if there's a lack of support of youth services for young people?
So I think, from my perspective, if we look at antisocial behaviour and local community priorities as a whole, where I'm really focusing on at the moment is the national policing uplift in policing numbers. We've got to get that right. That's a national priority. At the moment, we've got a record number of police officers. But coming back to the question here, that's really important that we look at the prevention. Because the only way we're actually going to bring crime down, antisocial behaviour down, and actually outcomes of all people go up then, is to put prevention first. Get ahead, get upstream. And my philosophy has always been, when it comes to reducing crime, is that you need that two-pronged approach of a really good preventative strategy along with robust law enforcement. And I'll give you an example here. So I was in the police for 30 years, and I remember policing Cambridge a while back, and when I was a young police officer, we spent most of our time sort of running around chasing local criminals, often burglars, and a violent crime, having your house burgled. But it was generally the same people. It was the same people, and it was generally young people. And I remember a particular case, and it was a 12-year-old. And this 12-year-old was a prolific burglar. It was a one-child burgling spree. And he would get arrested quite often, and he'd get put through the courts, and he'd probably go off to detention, and then he would come out, and then he would burgle again. And then he'd go through the courts, and he'd get back into detention, etc. And it was just a complete cycle of reoffending. And what really upset me, this was a 12-year-old, this is what really upset me, is that once I went round to see this young boy, just to arrest him because he committed burglary, and he was asleep on the stairs. Asleep on the stairs at masonette. That's because he didn't have a bed. And he didn't have a bed, and his mother was a drug abuser, drug addictions, and frankly, the services missed him, and probably the services weren't there, to intervene. I think we're in a much better place now, but it's not lost on me that if you really want to solve some of these really big problems, when you look now about knife crime and serious violence, that prevention is key. And that's been recognised by government as well, with an awful lot of investment in violence reduction units, which is all about youth services. And as part of my police and crime plan, we'll be looking in Cambridgeshire as well to introduce that violence reduction and prevention is actually the first theme in the police and crime plan, which I'll be releasing later this week, and we'll be investing an awful lot in prevention and youth services. But I think we still need to do more, and I'll be working with partners across the piece to make sure that we've got all those measures in place.
Okay.
Jack, can I come in? Because I know this is question time, but it's wonderful hearing Darryl, and because I want to ask. Maybe I shouldn't be asking questions. It's more of a discussion point. But undoubtedly, prevention can be very important. There's lots of examples of lots of resources being put into some of the gang crime in Glasgow, for example, has helped with kind of reducing knife crime and murder in that area. But for me, and this is maybe where sometimes politics comes into it, and I'm not looking to split the bon and me that we're all sitting here, is that I'm thinking, how the hell does it get that bad that you've got a kid sleeping on stairs with a mum who's a drug user? Now that you describe it, because to me there's a cause there rather than prevention. And I'll do my party political bit, because that's maybe what you expect, is that for me it's society's failed. It's a bit like we talked earlier on about using food banks. We shouldn't even be talking about food banks. They should never, in a country as rich as ours, the level of inequality giving us food banks, it shouldn't happen. And in the same way, the sort of description of how a circumstances arise where a kid of 12 is burgling, you're thinking, how the hell has it ever got that bad? Why didn't we care for them? What happened to society? Now, I'll say my bit, and I campaigned heavily on this concept of, 3 C's. It's about this idea of care, compassion, cooperation, and community. And we've stopped, as a society, I'm not going to make too many political points. We've stopped caring. You know, we stop caring for the most vulnerable in society. And the point is, sometimes you have to show compassion for those people who almost think deserve it, deserve what? They deserve to be looked after. So I throw it back to you, and I know it's a difficult one, Darrell, because I'm a bit forward, but for me, why aren't we talking about why those circumstances have happened? You know, as a society, we have increasing inequality. And if I can give you one thing to go and read about afterwards, Michael Marmot, who is a brilliant man who showed time and time again that the outcomes in regard to health, and I'm a doctor, so I'll talk about health, were so much influenced by what their personal, social, economic circumstances. It's the same thing. If you don't get a good education, your life chances are held back. And for me, when I heard you described there, I wasn't thinking prevention. I was thinking that's poverty, and we've got too much poverty in this country, and that's why I personally wanted to get involved in politics to make a change. And the argument is, how do we all, cross-party if it needs to be, start caring more and dealing with poverty, and then maybe we won't have as many problems.
I don't disagree with any of that. You know, other than, you know, politically, actually, that was 20 years ago.
No, I'm
it was a different government at the time. You know, I think we have moved on. You know, we have moved on, particularly with a sort of a multi-agency, you know, approach, and it needed to happen. But I don't for one moment suggest that you know, we're anywhere near that point where we've got all of those pieces in place which prevent, and I talk about prevention, only because that's the terminology I use, in policing, preventing crime. You know, but when we talk about young people who often will end up in the criminal justice system, they talk about adverse childhood experiences. Naturally, poverty will be one of them, along with domestic abuse in the home, you know, along with exposure to neglect, etc. All of those things. And for me, you know, I am absolutely passionate as well that the services are there to actually pick those up early, intervene with those things early, and try and give that young person, you know, the best chance possible going forward. It's, for me, it's for that young person primarily and the people around them. But actually, going back to the case of the burglar, you know, it prevents all those victims of crime, you know, these terrible crimes that are going on. And actually, it's a third point as well. You know, putting people through criminal justice system costs an absolute fortune. We'd probably be better off, you know, just making sure that we're focusing those resources in the right place. You know, and a lot of work is now going on. I mentioned the violence reduction units. I think you mentioned Glasgow actually came from that model around the country. That's exactly what they're doing, putting those services in up front to make sure that we're not having to deal with the downstream consequences that we see at the moment.
Can I just come back on that, actually? Because, I mean, those are all the reasons that we're all here and why we all want to serve the public. Because it's absolutely wrong, as I said at the beginning, that people don't have the right life chances. And I'm really proud that as a government, we have reduced inequality over the last 10 years and reduced poverty, because that is really critical. And what you've seen in the budget that we've just put out is a spending increase across all departments. And what that means is that there is more money in public services this year than there was last year and the year before, and that's on education, and that's on health, and that's on councils having money to support people in their communities. But what you've also seen that the Chancellor's done in this budget is specifically identify how do we support families who are struggling. So there's a programme that he's put in place for families, because that young mother that Darrell talked about probably didn't know how to support her young child. And so there's a number of family hubs that will be around the country so that people know how to go and get that support when they need it to look after their young people. I was a Justice Minister for 4 years, and I saw a lot of the people that Darrell talked about going through the justice system. And I spoke to young people who had committed crimes and spent time in detention. Nobody wants to, what I learned is nobody wants to be a criminal at all. And some of those people were lost. They weren't picked up. They were a lot of people who go into prison have been excluded from school, and they've sort of fallen through the gaps. And it's not just the responsibility of government. because government can't do everything all the time, and to think that government can solve everybody's problems is just impossible. We all as a society and a community need to help and support people, and so that's why what we need to do is put in place programs and communities that help to support each other.
Yes, but if I can come back on that, I mean, I think I would disagree with Darryl that we've actually moved on, because I don't think we have. I think there are far, far, far too many families in acute and absolutely oppressive poverty. And I think that the recent decision to take away the £20 universal credit uplift from those families was absolutely shocking, particularly when we're seeing escalating cost of living, food prices going up, fuel prices going up, the cost of heating your home, the energy costs going up. And yes, they're capped, but those costs have gone up hugely. Housing costs as well, home ownership far beyond the dreams of most young people these days. In all of that, we're seeing people tremendously oppressed by poverty, and I don't think things have moved on. I wanted to say a couple of things as well. I think we talked about drug use, and I think it's critically important that we recognise that our policy on drugs of just progressively announcing new policies to crack down harder on drugs has failed. It's failed for decades, and we need to move the discussion of drugs away, and drug use away from seeing it in a criminal model. How can we criminalise people who have small amounts of drugs for personal use? And we need to really focus on that as a public health issue, a key public health issue, so that we can help people move away. Because once you criminalise drug use in small quantities, you throw everybody who experiments, and I will admit I never experimented, I'm a cautious person by nature, it just wasn't me. But those young people who did choose to experiment, the only way they would do that would be by being thrown into the arms of criminal gangs and drug pushers and so on. And that leads to an escalation in crime, because you start putting people into the path of criminals, where if you had a more health-based model of looking at people's needs when they come into contact with drugs, I think you'd have much less of a problem. And finally, I just want to say something about criminal justice, because the court system in this country, the whole criminal justice model, is on its knees in this country at the moment. It is taking years, literally years, for cases to be heard. There are people waiting, victims of crime, as well as perpetrators of crime, waiting years for court spaces in order to have their cases heard and dealt with. And that's just unacceptable. And we've really got to get a grip and restore the criminal justice model so that it can deal swiftly as well as fairly with everybody that comes in its path.
Jack, can I just come in on the universal credit point?
Quickly.
Very quickly. So there are 2 points on the universal credit point. So the first one is that the £20 universal credit was one of the temporary measures that we put in place, like we put in furlough, like we put in all of the loans and everything else we put in, because we were in the middle of a pandemic. And we've taken that away because it was temporary. But we've done 2 things. One is we have reduced the taper rate for universal credit. What that practically means for people is, if you're in work, for 2 million people who are on universal credit but in work, you will get £1,000 extra. The second thing that we've done is what the government believes in is not just giving people money to support themselves, but what it believes in is, for those people who can work, we need to get them into a job. And there's so many reasons why getting people into a job is important, because it's good for your own self-esteem, it's good for you to be able to stand on your own 2 feet, it's good for you to progress and contribute and be able to look after your family. So the Chancellor, over the course of the last few months, has put in place a whole range of programmes to get people into work, and that could be young people through the Kickstart scheme. It could be, if you're on universal credit, getting you back into the workplace, because he's spending billions of pounds getting people into jobs, and it's working. We've got our unemployment level is coming down, and so we're getting people in. So what we're doing as the government is spending money, getting people into jobs, and giving those people who can't get into jobs the support that they need. I mentioned the £500 million, I mentioned the people on low income in universal credit. I've got loads of things to say on drugs, but I'll keep that.
But most people who are on benefit are in work.
And so they will benefit from the universal taker rate.
But it's not that either-or situation, and so often we're talking about getting people off benefits and into work. It is entirely unacceptable that people are working long hours and being paid at such a low level.
That's
We
why
have to have the state to
A,
support
have the
them.
universal credit, and B, increase the national living wage. And I think
Jack,
Jack
just
probably wants to.
on Lorna's point as well, the idea of children experimenting with drugs frightens me a little bit. You know, but I think I'll take your point on face value. But actually, what we should be doing is focusing on that high harm. And the high harm at the moment are those with dependency. So what can we do? That's a medical issue as well. But the high harm is around some of the county line stuff that we see at the moment, and the exploiting of young people. You know, quite often by giving out drugs. And this is the bit I would be worried about experimenting, because that's exactly the sort of grooming that the people who are carrying out county lines do. Do you want to experiment with this? Do you want to do this? And that is a priority. That's a priority for me, the constabulary government at the moment, going after the county lines which are exploiting young people and making their life an absolute misery.
Okay, right, we're done. Is everyone finished? We've all got our points.
Put it off my chest. Thank you. I feel better.
Okay, so that's the first half done. It's been actually gone by really quick, I think. We've had a lot of questions. Now we'll go for a quick break. We'll go stretch your legs, have a drink, grab some snacks. If you'd like to ask a question to our panel in the second half, we're going to take some audience questions. There's some stalls, and they've got postcards on them. You can write a question on them, give them to a member of the site team. They have a little 2020 logo on their shirt, or you can give them to me. I'm always happy to take them. And we'll be coming back at 8:45, and we hope you will come back, and we hope to see you all at 8:45. It's you for Spurs in the Okay, thank you everyone for coming back. I hope you all had a nice rest and a nice break. We're now going on to some of the audience's questions that have been asked for the panel. The first one I have here is from Evelyn Patterson. Can you find them, Shannon? I can't actually see them. I can't. I'm completely blind here.
Dr. Nick has recently written a blog explaining the benefits of green spaces for health, but Fenton District Council say that providing better access to green space is never important enough to get funding. How can we give more priority to green space?
Right, okay, I'll say that again. I've got a card here. So Dr. Nick has recently written a blog explaining the benefits of green spaces for health, but Fenton District Council says that providing better access to green space is never important enough to get funding. How can we give more priority to green space? So, I mean, Dr. Nick, you seem most comfortable, so we'll put you first.
Well, it's very kind of you to take an interest in my blog. But actually, I think it raises an important point, which green spaces has a sense of, that's the environment, but actually what I have found, and I'm really keen to actually push, is that if there's one thing that we've learned over the last 18 months, and soon be 2 years, before, almost 2 years since we first started hearing about COVID-19, is that actually the importance of your well-being, that's your physical and your mental health, can be so much affected by what you have in terms of access to open spaces. And when people were being in lockdown and people were kind of essentially caged, that has huge implications on particularly on mental health across all age ranges. And it is true that in terms of how I've tried to approach working within the combined authority, this idea of compassion, it starts with compassion. If you look like you care, if you show that you care in how you develop public policy about transport, about housing, people get it and people want to, and then they want to work with you. You get the compassion, you cooperate, you get the community. But the thing that really, really is at the heart of it, as well as improving the environment, is actually improving public health and well-being. And I kind of sort of alluded to it before, the work of Michael Marmot. He was a great man who identified that it's not so much, it doesn't matter how good your local hospital, be it Hinchinbrook, be it Peterborough, we are lucky enough to live in the world where we have the NHS, and it provides incredible amounts of support and health and keeps us healthy, but actually how likely you are in terms of your general health about issues around obesity, your likelihood of dying of stroke, cancer, heart disease. So much of it is affected by other factors. And for me, working within the district councils, the county councils, making sure that we address all issues, and that does involve working around having a healthy environment where you have good air quality. These things are going to be so much more important. They need to be at the forefront when we make public policy. So yes, green spaces are important. I will keep championing them. I will allow other people to try and justify why they wouldn't see it that way.
Is there anything anyone else like to add about prioritising green space, apart from what Dr. Nick has said?
Yeah, I'm happy to have a go
Yeah.
on that. I mean, I do think green space is incredibly important, and I was delighted a couple of weeks ago to be shown around Wenny Meadow, just down the road from here. Absolutely beautiful local space, and I've driven past those trees, that big screen of trees, so many times and had no idea at all what was behind there. It's just an absolutely beautiful space, and the idea of losing that from a community is just so horrifying. We are one of the most biodiversity deprived counties in the country here in Cambridgeshire, and it's just so important to treasure the green spaces that are absolutely rich in flowers and plants and animals and insects and invertebrates and so on. You know, there's just so much we need to do to enhance the biodiversity of our area and to provide spaces that people can use for recreation and spaces that they can access that are near where they live, so they don't have to travel a long way to get to a park or a riverside or somewhere where they can just be with nature in a very rich sense. And I think lockdown, I'd agree with Nick, lockdown really brought that out, and it was interesting to see it in the first sort of 6 months or so of lockdown, a lot of people moving out of the big settlements into the countryside, which of course had the unfortunate effect of pushing up house prices in the countryside and rents in the countryside, because everybody was trying to escape the big settlements and wanting to be somewhere where they could have a quality of life, including access to green space and the open air. And I mean, that's something the county council is quite engaged in and responsible for. We're responsible for biodiversity, for country parks. We have a lot of those as well. And I think there's a lot more that we could do around that with allotments. Your parish councils do allotments, and there are now systems where GPs and doctors can prescribe things like activity on allotments and so on, which is incredibly good for mental health as well as physical health. So there's a lot to be done on this area, and it's a really interesting question, Evelyn, so thank you for that.
I'd just like to say actually that in Donington we are quite well looked after for green space. We have 3 very nice green fields, if you like, one of which contains a skate park, and the other one is a recreation field with sports facilities, etc. on it. But the one thing that I would like to add in here, and it's probably going off the matter in hand a little bit, but we somehow or another have got to stop people building houses on green land. I'm ever so sorry, but it's so important that we keep that. And along come the developers and pitch their tents on stuff that ought not to be built upon, and I feel very strongly about that. And I'd hate to see a lot of the green fields disappear as a consequence of that. Finland doesn't contain too much in the way of scenery, bless it. You have to go quite a way before you actually get to a hill, but it has its own charm and it's great. But as I say, the more concrete they put down, the less we're going to have in the way of mental health help. And that's where I'm coming from anyway. So that's enough for me.
So I completely agree on the value and importance of green spaces, not just for the environment, but as Nick said, in relation to mental health. It's absolutely essential for our well-being, not just to see green spaces, but also I read a study that said just if you look at beautiful things, it's also beneficial for your mental health. So the way that when we do build, we build. If we build beautiful buildings, then even if they're in a built-up area, there is an advantage, a mental health advantage, in having them well designed. And I think that the value that the government puts on mental health, and a number of years ago already now, described how mental and physical health should be seen as equal and are indeed interrelated, is extremely important. And there's been a significant separate budget for mental health with a long-term plan for improving mental health. I'm very lucky that I have Wycombe Fen in my constituency, a fantastic area of open space, which is also hugely environmentally friendly. And just to pick out one thing, a tiny thing, but an important thing, I think, that was announced last week in the budget was funding for tennis courts, because I do think it's also important, as well as having beautiful open spaces, that we encourage young and old people to be getting out there doing sport and being active, which is also a contributory factor to improving mental health.
Okay, nothing for you, Darryl, on the environment?
No, you're wrong, Jack. There is something for me. Definitely, because I want to say the importance of green spaces. Well, I mentioned earlier, I grew up in London, and I moved to Cambridgeshire for that very reason. I fell in love with it. You know, it doesn't have hills and it doesn't have a coast, but there's just something beautiful about it, and that's why I'm here, and that's why it's so important that we do keep those green spaces. And Lucy and Norman touched on the sort of mental health, and I'm a firm believer in that. I've got dogs, I'll go out walking with the dogs, and that's your downtime, that's the time. Take a little walk out in the countryside and just think about all your woes. They go away just so well. But mental health is such a key issue to policing as well. You know, many of the calls that policing deal with, it's not actually about crime and disorder, the sort of stuff you'd expect the police. It's about mental health and mental illness. So a lot of time is taken up on that. And quite rightly, someone needs to be there, but it tends to be the police are the last port of call. So I have to pick up the pieces when perhaps colleagues in mental health and others should be doing a little bit more there as well. And that's my view. But I know there's some work going on. But really, really important. Not just for our own sort of well-being, but for all of us, for society as a whole, on so many fronts.
And actually, on the mental health topic, I think we have another question here from Kerry Manzi.
Hiya, I don't know if I can be heard. Is that good?
Yeah, we can hear you.
You're going to have to forgive me, I might have to rant a little bit first. Well, not ramble. So there is a statistic from Young Minds that says that 1 in 3 young people in every classroom have a diagnosable mental health condition. There are a variety of campaigns, specifically from charities like Young Minds, like Act Early, introducing mental health into our education systems, and local communities like Fund the Hubs. What is your perspective on those campaigns and the fact that such campaigns like Fund the Hubs haven't been included in the autumn spending review? And what do you think that you could do to personally take action and support these issues?
Right, Lucy, you can start that one.
So I think mental health, I have 2 children around your age. I think mental health is, mental health issues are growing, and it's really important that we tackle them, because if you tackle them early, then they don't escalate. I mentioned that I'm very interested in education, and I go into all my schools all the time, even, as you can see, going to schools that aren't in my constituency. And I did a session I was on the Education Select Committee, and I went to Hills Road, which also isn't in my constituency, and on the Education Select Committee we were doing a report into mental health. And I said, I just want to spend 5 minutes at the beginning asking you these questions about mental health, and then of course you can ask me any questions you like as the MP. And we spent the whole session on mental health, because that's what young people wanted to talk about. And there is a lot of support in different ways to support young people and old people in their mental health. So, I mean, the NHS budget went up significantly. I think there was around 10 billion extra for various things. And of course the Department for Health and the NHS work out how they divide their money up. So there was significant money into the NHS as a whole. But it's not just about NHS money. So I talked earlier about the family hubs that were in the budget as well. So I think so young mothers need support when you have children. I mean, I think when you have children, no one prepares you for being a mother. There's no book that tells you how to do it. And the studies show that how you interrelate with your baby, even before they're born and in the early years, is absolutely critical. And there was a chunk of money in the budget for early years and supporting mothers through these parental hubs, and not only when they've had the children as they go through life as well. So there was money for youth clubs as well. I mean, so there's so many ways that you can tackle mental health. I know that the HSC, that the health department and the education department have been working to ensure that we have specialist counsellors in schools in order to tackle that those low-level problems as well.
Okay, anything else anyone would like to add on that, on the Young Minds campaign?
I'd just like to ask one question, if I could, probably to Lucy, sorry. What effect do you think social media has on mental health?
Well, I was going to say like everyone here, but I mean, like all probably parents, I think social media has a significant impact. I mean, we know that mental health issues have gone up. We don't really know why. But one thing possibly is to do with the in social media, how people think other people are living perfect lives. They are completely on social media the whole time, which is a bad thing for concentration. And so another thing that government's doing, I mean, we can't tackle everything, but the one thing the government's doing is working with the social media companies. We're about to put forward, there's a bill going through scrutiny at the moment before it comes to Parliament, the online safety bill, which will look at how do we regulate the social media companies, in terms of bullying and, a whole host of things that go on social media that and on the internet that shouldn't do, age verification. This is a huge issue that we need to tackle, and what we are tackling. Massive.
I think it's a for young people there are so many enormous pressures, and it's a very I remember personally, far longer ago than I would like to admit, but how difficult it is growing up and finding your identity with so many pressures on you. And I think lockdown has made that very difficult for a lot of young people whose schooling has been interrupted one way or another, whose ability to socialise out of school has been quite constrained and made quite difficult. But there are other pressures as well. There are exam pressures, social media, and the grooming that goes on of young people on social media, and the pressure that there is there, and also what we were talking about earlier, the poverty and the limited life chances of far too many people contributing to that as well. And I think we don't talk about there is still a stigma around mental health in a way that there isn't around physical health. And if you have a period of mental ill health, I think it's very difficult sometimes to find that accepted and dealt with in the same way that physical health problems can be. And I remember very much being one of those 1 in 3. It probably wasn't 1 in 3 in my day, but perhaps probably less, in that as a sixth former, I did go through a period which lasted all the way through my university days of being on antidepressants and being severely depressed, and that experience of mental ill health has lived with me. I did my A-levels on a sort of a fog of Valium and antidepressants, and it is very, very hard struggling with that. Particularly when you've got a medical establishment that, particularly in my young day, far too long ago, was very good at starting you off on a course of drugs to try and keep things under control, and not very good at all at getting you off them at the other end as well. And I came off those antidepressants about 5 years later, very much under my own steam, because I felt very unsupported by anybody being interested in helping me to get beyond that and come out the other side. And I do think, and it's a bit of a cliche, that it has probably made me a much stronger person, but it's not something I would wish on anybody. And it happens for all sorts of reasons to people, unexpectedly, far too often. And we need to treat that with the seriousness that we would treat a broken ankle or a tumour, because it has devastating impacts, or can do, on people's lives. So it's a really important issue, Kerry.
Jack, can I just briefly pick up something as well that one you said about during COVID and some of the issues there. We did see quite a lot of reports, blaming young people, and we saw some reports about parties, and this was the reason for COVID spreading. Like you, Nick, I have 5 kids of your age, and I've got a really different view. Yeah, like some adults, some people did break the rule, but generally speaking, most of our youngsters did exactly what they were asked to do, and they did it for the older generations. And for that, I am really, really proud of our young people, because I think it's down to you that we're in the place where we are now, and moving forward, hopefully we'll move our way through this.
I'm not going to add anything else, because I think there's probably a sense of unanimous agreement around how we need to tackle the problem, which is undoubtedly, Lucy has said, increased over the last decades particularly. Or maybe an acknowledgement, and actually I think Lorna's been very brave there to talk about previous troubles. Working with my own profession, there was poor treatment in the past by medics, a lack of understanding, give them a pill, it will go away. I would just draw back to yourself as the original questioner. Just never be shy of talking about the problem, being willing to share that experience. We're seeing it now with examples within our own royal family. I remember once watching Ant and Dec, where they just stopped the whole programme and said it's good to talk, and they just stood there for a minute and made you think. So lead by your own example, and people listening, be appreciative of what you've done here, because you've made talking about mental health on a parity with physical health, which is what kind of Lorna's alluding to. So just keep talking about it, and again, challenge the people who are in power, whoever they may be, whatever political allegiance are, to make sure that the proper funding, that you get equity, so the right amount of money goes into the right services to provide people at the right time. But well done for asking the question.
Okay, and we have another question here from Grace Cronin.
Hello. Okay. So my question involves talking about minorities and diversity in our community. I myself am mixed race, and I've lived in Doddington for pretty much my whole life. And so I just want to say, on a community level, and especially in Finland, I feel that our community lacks in a lot of diversity, whether it be race or with, I suppose, being seen in like the LGBTQ community. And how do you think that minorities can feel seen, and how can our community be more inclusive to those minority groups?
Okay, so I'd actually like to answer some first, if that's okay. So I want to talk about obviously the advisory board and the work that we do, and how diverse we think we need to make, that the board that we've got, being a representative of the whole community. I mean, we're working with lots of people. We're working with the Kite Trust in Ely, who work with LGBT people or LGBTQ plus people. I'm really proud to be able to do the work that I'm doing. We work with people who have maybe a disability, people who are young carers, people who have different races, and I think it's really important as a representative group that we need to make sure that we represent the population as best as possible. Right. Right, on that lovely note, Daryl, go on.
So, I mean, I will talk about the area that I'm responsible for in policing. I mentioned earlier that there is a national uplift in policing. With that, comes a very firm commitment from government and from the Policing Minister and the Home Secretary that what they want to see with those extra numbers is a police force that represents its community. And to be honest, I think policing has struggled there. Historically, when I joined the police many years ago, it was like probably 90% male, probably more than that actually, with 5 to 10% female. We are in a much better place now with gender, and in Cambridgeshire, the latest figures, we're recruiting about 50-50 on gender. But we've still got some way to go when it comes to ethnicity as well. I think in Cambridgeshire, the figure across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough is around 10% BAME community. So that's our target in policing. We've got to do that. I'll go back to my original point in relation to the Pelian principles, they call them, of policing. The police of the public and the public of the police. And if we don't get that right, those levels of representation of our community, then there's less trust, confidence and legitimacy in our policing. So I'm really keen, and that's conversations I'm having with the Chief Constable every week. How are we going about recruiting? And do you know what? I don't think that the police, and I certainly haven't got all the answers. So that's why it's really important to engage with all of our communities, including young people, because particularly when it comes to recruitment, you are the future police. There are going to be future police officers hopefully here as well. So how do we get that right? How do we encourage more people from different communities to join the police? And I think we need to carry on those conversations and have a relentless drive to do it.
Lucy?
So what Daryl just said, I think, is applicable across government. And I was really pleased. I went to actually in Ely it was in Huntingdonshire. I went to one of the police recruitment sessions with Daryl, and it was brilliant to see a large number, over 50%, I think, of the room who were training to be detectives were women. So I think that was excellent. But I've had a number of roles in government, and I mentioned I was a minister in the Ministry of Justice, therefore responsible for the prison service, the probation service, and also had a role, that's overseen sort of the judiciary and the sort of as lawyers coming through, and now in the Treasury too. There is at every stage a recognition that we need, as Daryl said, to have areas of government that represent people. It's something that is looked at very carefully, and really importantly, is we must have MPs who reflect the communities that they serve, or the communities of the country as a whole. And we're not there yet. All parties have made great strides in having an increase in the number of women. We're not there in terms of diversity, but it's about increasing opportunity. It's about people putting themselves forward, and it's about continuing to recognise the value and importance of having diverse communities representing the diverse communities that we all serve.
Okay, Ruth?
I was just wondering whether I ought to open my mouth or not. My considered opinion is, and it is only my opinion, nothing to do with Doddington or parish councils or whatever, is I think it doesn't matter whether you're blue, black, white, mixed race, LGBT or whatever it is, you're a person. And it's the centre of you that counts. And I think we pay too much attention to the fact that there are minorities in the country, and that we should have a certain amount of people from that minority in various aspects of politics, in fact of life in general. I just think if it's like when you're young and you apply for a job that they're probably looking for for somebody who's twice as old as you are. My opinion, that if you are good enough, it doesn't matter how old you are. It's what's inside you that counts. It's what that comes out of you that counts. And I don't think the colour of your skin or your ethnicity or anything else like that actually counts at all. I think we're just all human beings, and I think we should just mix in and get on with life, basically. And as I say, now I'm not so sure whether I opened my mouth or not, but that's my considered opinion anyway. So.
All right, Dr. Nick.
So, well done on asking probably the most difficult question of the night. You can collectively feel people skewered on their own kind of, what am I going to say, and you kind of articulated that there. I grew up in the northeast in a rural community in Northumberland, and in some ways, you know, all white, you know, very little sort of ethnic diversity growing up in the 1970s and 1980s. And then I went to London to be American, and my life changed. I saw there was so many different kind of ways that people live their lives and come from all over the world. I've always said that question, if you ever got a chance to pass a law, and I say I would make everybody go and live in London for 2 years, because it absolutely changed me in the way that I saw the world. But I even before then, I'd kind of chosen my politics. I see myself as a democratic socialist, a Labour guy, and I would say I have fought discrimination all my life. You know, I would think of that. And the uncomfortable truth is, it's only within relatively recently times, as part of being a doctor, you know, I'm sure you probably do this in the police force, in probation services, in the fire service, whatever. You know, you come across this concept of training and education, and essentially the concept of unconscious bias. And the awful truth is that I have to say that there has been times that I have done things and said things that were wrong. You know, and I just didn't know it, because there's another phrase that hasn't been used here. And again, it's an uncomfortable thing. It's the concept of white privilege. Again, and we have to acknowledge that the world, I talked about inequality based on poverty and everything. The world is unequal, and the colour of your skin, much as though it shouldn't be, because I know what you're trying to say, but there is, and this goes back over decades, I mean, it goes over hundreds of years. You know, we have to accept that there was a time where we took on, slavery happened in this country. It's not that long ago where it was actually illegal to be gay, you know. So, look, the world is a better place. I speak to my daughter educates me so much more on LGBTQ plus things. And I sit sometimes, I think, I hope I don't get asked a question about gender, because I'm so worried about things, but I want to learn. So the answer to your question is that it should be in education, and we shouldn't be afraid to talk about that at a very early age. You know, you will go back to in the 80s, one of the campaigns that I went on, I wasn't even sure, well, I thought I should have, but was Section 28, and the idea that you shouldn't be promoting kind of the idea that homosexuality was not right. So that's gone. That was the thing. That was Stonewall did the thing. But in truth, we should challenge discrimination every time we see it, and we should be, you know, if you see a friend being discriminated against, you know, but if you see, you know, somebody taking a cat call across the thing, you challenge people, and you should always do that. But a lot of it comes back to education, and we have to keep learning, because I will admit that I've learned a lot more in the last few years about as kind of inequality and discrimination, and be around issues around Black Lives Matter and understanding white privilege. It comes back to education and challenging every time.
I just want to thank you for those comments, because I do really appreciate that, and I just want to say that I definitely do think that white privilege does exist, because like I said before, I am mixed race. My mother is Asian, and I look white, and I've not received any racial discrimination, because people just don't know that I'm mixed race. Whereas my mum, on the other hand, has, and I think growing up in a community where it is very it's not diverse. And I think what I was sort of trying to say is that I would like it just to feel a bit more seen, a little bit more. I know it's we can't make it suddenly more diverse. I know it doesn't work like that, but I suppose it's more, how can those minority groups feel more seen? And I really do appreciate the work that that you're all doing to do that for us, because it's so important. So thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Grace. That really summed it up. I just wanted to say that, as I said at the beginning of the evening, on the county council there was a change of political control about 6 months ago, and the party that had been running the county council for a long time was now in opposition, and a new groups of councillors came together to run the council. And one of the absolute joys of being in that group now running the county council is the sheer diversity of the councillors that we've got. I look opposite to the group that used to run the council, and of the 38 of them, I think, only 5 are women. And there's no real discernible diversity there at all. And yet, in the joint administration that's running the county council, we've got people from all walks of life. We've got people from Eastern Europe. We've got LGBTQ people. We've got a huge number of women and women in senior positions. The leader and the deputy leader of the county council are women. The chair of and vice chair of the Children and Young People's Committee are women. I'm a chair of a significant committee, and it's just so healthy to see real diversity and people who look like us. And you look opposite sometimes, and you think, your life is so obviously unlike the experience of people who are female or mixed race or who, of a different sexual orientation. And you think we've got to have, in all levels of government, local government as much as anywhere else, we've got to be governed by people who are like us and understand what our lives are like in all their variety. And that's just a terrifically important thing to do, otherwise you don't make the right decisions. And we do have that unconscious bias and that view that says, actually, the right person to do this job is a person who's like me. You know, and it's incumbent on all of us, when we are in a position to choose somebody to do a role, to put that aside and think about who is actually the best person and how can we bring people together of multiple different backgrounds and talents to do the roles that they can do, even though they think they can't. And just finally, I think there's a wonderful bit of social media clip, I don't know if anyone's seen it, where there's a classroom of primary school children and they're asked to draw 3 people. They're asked to draw an ambulance driver, I think it is, a firefighter and a fighter pilot. And they're all drawing away, and you know, this ambulance man is called Joe or whatever, and he comes and helps people when they're sick, you know. And then the teacher says to them, the children, would you like to meet a real ambulance driver, firefighter and fighter pilot? And the children go, yes. And in walk these 3 people in their uniforms, and they take off their kind of, you know, their helmets and all the rest of it, and they're all women. And you see the young girls in that classroom, their eyes light up. And it's really moving, thinking, actually, I could do that. And I drew a bloke, but I could do that. And it was just incredibly powerful. We've got to make that happen for so many different communities who make up the country that we live in.
Jack, would you mind if I just came in? Because I think Lorna made a party political point on a really important non-party political subject. So I just wanted to point out that of the Cabinet, we have a Home Secretary, we have a Secretary of State for Business, we have a Health Secretary, and we have a Home Secretary, all of whom are not white. And we've also had 2 female Prime Ministers, and I'm really proud of the fact that the Conservative Party has done that through, not through putting people in because of where they come from, but because they deserve that, on the merits of those people who are doing a fantastic job.
Totally agree.
I've got a question here. There's no name on this one, so I'm just going to have to read this one out. And it's to Lucy, actually. This is just for you. So.
Anonymous.
Yeah. Regarding your point on cutting the £20 universal credit, it is impossible to ignore the knock-on effect the pandemic has had on families who are still dealing with the consequences. It's very easy to say the pandemic was temporary, but are we really post-COVID, and how is the government helping those affected?
During COVID, what we thought when we entered into the pandemic was that we were going to have a really, really massive economic shock. And we did, because the pandemic was the worst recession for 300 years. But the measures that the Chancellor took during that crisis have enabled the economy to bounce back at a rate that was not anticipated whilst we were in it. So what the OBR forecast when we entered into the pandemic was that we would have unemployment at a rate of 12%. It's actually at around 5%. So that's 2 million people who have been saved or managed to not go into unemployment or not stay in unemployment as a result of the measures that we took. And those measures were all the £400 billion that we spent during the pandemic. So because we spent £4 billion and because the economy was strong because of the measures that we took before we went into the pandemic, fortunately the economic consequences for people are not as stark as they could have been. And so what we are doing now is still supporting people because people still do need to be supported, but what we're doing is trying to support them to get back into work. And the Chancellor has spent billions of pounds getting people back into work. So as I mentioned before, there's schemes for young people, there's Kickstart scheme, so employers get a benefit from employing young people. There's a scheme to get people back into work who are long-term unemployed. And there's also a scheme to help the over 50s, because the people we know who've been not gone back into work are young and old. So the schemes focus on them as well as a number of other people. So that's where our focus is, making sure, and we're spending a lot of money on it, people get back into jobs. And the universal credit taper cut that we did helps support those people when they get back into jobs to get paid properly, to make it worthwhile for them to go back into work. Giving them, on average, £1,000 extra a year, in addition to the national living wage increase, which is another £1,000 for 2 million people a year. But of course, there will be people who don't fall within those categories, and the government is absolutely committed to supporting them, which is why we announced £500 million additional sums for people who weren't in work and were suffering and struggling, so that they could get the extra support they needed through local councils.
Okay, that is all the time we have left for questions. If there is still a question that we didn't get to, you can still contact these people. They all have ways of contacting them, email addresses. The teams of people that are literally made to answer your questions. So I'm sure if you ping them over to them, Dr. Nick is clearly not looking excited to that.
Hand up my card.
I don't know about you, I've had an absolutely fabulous evening, and I hope everyone else enjoyed the event and that you're going to leave more informed than you had arrived. And before we finish, I'd like to thank our panel. I'd like to thank Ruth Hoffton first. Lorna Dupra. Lucy Fraser. Mayor Dr. Nick Johnson, sir. And Al Preston. We have a couple more thank yous. I'd like to thank Cromwell Community College, especially Mrs. Horn and Mrs. Surtees for hosting the event and letting us come here and completely transform their hall for us. We'd like to thank Shannon and the 2020 team who have been amazing and have made the event all come together. The Youth Advisory Board members for attending and their questions and just being really, really awesome. I'd like to say a massive thank you to our resident political consultant and friend to the Youth Advisory Board, Councillor Liz Every. And of course, I'd thank you all for coming along, and it's been great to have you here, and for being so engaged, being so supportive.
And I would like to thank Jack, who has been absolutely wonderful this evening. So let's give that a round of applause. Not only has Jack been a wonderful host, he has attended many meetings to plan tonight, and he also was the one that recruited all of our panel. So he's done a fabulous job, and he's a credit to you for all. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.